Welcome to Axiom Consulting Partners webinar, Trends in Talent Acquisition. My name is Erica Grant. I am a principal with Axiom Consulting Partners. We're passionate about helping our clients grow and execute more effectively by pairing together strategy, behavioral science, and AI. Amid what some are calling the Great Resignation, organizations are challenged to compete in a market that is increasingly complex, competitive, and dynamic. Talent acquisition organizations are struggling with what they can do, where they can invest to really move the needle. We've invited 3 talent acquisition leaders here today to offer their perspective on what's really changed and what other organizations can do to compete. First is Kristen Wyrick. Kristen is the Vice President of Global Talent Acquisition and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Alcon, a global medical organization in the eye care space. Kristen is the former head of talent acquisition and DE&I for both AbbVie and United Airlines. Joining Kristen is Brandon Woods. Brandon is the head of people operations at Medium. Medium is a Silicon Valley-based media tech company. And prior to Medium, Brandon led HR operations and performance improvement at Kemper Insurance. He's been in the industry for over 10 years and brings HR transformation, operations, and technology experience. And lastly, joining our 2 other panelists here is Stephanie Worley. Stephanie is the Vice President of Talent Acquisition for Bright Horizons, a childcare organization with over 1,000 childcare centers worldwide. Stephanie is the former VP of Talent Acquisition for Hertz and has over 20 years of experience transforming recruiting teams, processes, and talent strategies to compete across industries. So I don't think any of us could have anticipated in 2021 how quickly and how drastically the talent market would have changed. So first question here, brass tacks, what really has changed in the talent market and how have these changes influenced your organization's recruiting strategies? Stephanie, why don't you get us started?
Sure, happy to. I think when I think about what's happened over the past 18 months, I think what I would say is that last year was really tough on recruiters in general, right? Many companies saw a swift end to their recruitment needs, and many recruitment teams were really kind of devastated. And when I think about how it impacted Bright Horizons, what I can say is that our hiring pause really was just a couple of months, and in some cases, weeks, as we had childcare centers that remained open throughout 2020 and then obviously all the way through 2021. So we were still hiring. So what we were doing was changing rapidly from day to day, week to week, trying to figure out how do we get the right talent in the door to help support families with their childcare needs. At Bright Horizons, what we did though, even though we were still hiring, it obviously wasn't at the same rate that we would normally hire. And so we took advantage of the downtime to do an overhaul of our recruiting related systems and processes. We also developed and launched a brand new employee value proposition and really took the opportunity to evaluate the talent that we had on the team. And so when we were rebuilding the team and bringing back the full team, what we did is we evaluated and looked for different skill sets that were set to complement what we were building out systemically. So for instance, we were very focused on our recruitment marketing efforts. So we brought somebody in that could manage our whole national level kind of recruitment marketing efforts for us. And it wasn't something that we had had in the past. What I would say is that by January of 2020, we were back into the thick of it, hiring across the country, but our ability to hire was definitely tested. I'm sure it's no surprise there's conversations about childcare shortages across the country, right? And so we had to figure out what would work and where could we find candidates. And what I would tell you is there's no magic bullet. Our recruitment strategy has really just kind of grown. It's comprehensive and it's very focused on meeting candidates where they are at. I think what we had to overcome was some of the concerns about safety And so we really looked at how do we talk about that with our candidates. And so we did that through sessions and being very clear on our job descriptions. But what I would say, how did we change? I think we went from a virtually completely in-person recruitment strategy to a virtual recruiting strategy. Invested heavily in those technologies. We did see a slight downward trend in kind of candidate acceptance of, I think there's some video fatigue, right, at the beginning of the year, but have seen that bounce back since the beginning of the summer. We're also really doubling down on our campus recruitment strategy, which is huge for us from a teacher perspective. And then from a home office or a corporate office perspective, our hiring managers are really making the shift to support talent attraction efforts for remote candidates, right? So we're expanding our applicant pool by looking outside of the immediate area where our home office is. And then I think finally what I would say is that we really focus on expanding a pretty comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion practice that we already had in place. But what we found is that more candidates are clearly making job choices based on their assessment of a company's DE&I commitment and how they give back. So at Bright Horizons, that's part of our nature, right? It's part of our culture. It's embedded in everything we do. So through our DE&I efforts, our Horizons degree program, which is focused on helping people from underserved communities get their college degree, and our foundation, we've really focused on telling the story about how we impact the futures of children, families, and the communities and where we work and live. And that was a message that we really, sorry. I would just say that was a message that we really needed to share loud and clear with our applicant pool.
Absolutely. And one of the things, Stephanie, that you said that I think we can all relate to here is, I don't think things are going back to the way we used to recruit before. I would say things have probably changed in some ways for the better for organizations, right? We're looking outside of the talent pools we had before. We're able to recruit more effectively virtually, but we can't go back to what we were doing before. So that means we need to get creative in many cases.
For sure. And I would say, I'm sorry, I would just say that one of the things that we've talked about is, these tried and true methods that you've used for years that always worked, they just don't work anymore, right? And sometimes, and I would say they might not work at the moment. And so what we've had to decide is we're going to be super flexible about how we go out and find talent. And if it works today, we're going to try it. If it doesn't work tomorrow, we can back off of that, but we have to be nimble and able to adjust to how applicants are looking for jobs today.
Absolutely. Brandon, how in your perspective have things changed in the way that you recruit, how you're thinking about the talent market and what it is that you're offering?
The tech space is very interesting because our most important role is essentially the engineering role, and engineers are already very tough to recruit given all the different options out there. So I would say that since organizations began to hire more, given the ramp up post all the shutdowns, so we're still in the pandemic to be clear, but it's even tougher, because organizations now you're finding they're throwing in more startup bonuses to individuals. There's more perks that you're seeing being offered to candidates, and frankly, they're increasing the salaries more. So it's quite tough in the market because you're seeing organizations respond essentially to more talent being available in the market, and then essentially responding to more opportunity than talent available in the market. The other thing that I would say that we're doing in particular is really selling candidates on the experience that they get by joining our organization. I have found that if you connect to a candidate's personal life and things that motivates them just to get out of bed every day, and then you relate that to your organization, you probably have a better chance of getting them through your process. I mean, we can put in as much technology as much great screening as we want to, but candidates really want an experience that's tailored to them and want to understand what's in it for them. So I think that's one thing that we value within our organization, and we essentially use it as our big sell to candidates every day.
Both of your examples, Stephanie and Brandon, are about thinking about tailoring not only what you offer, but how you go to market with what it is that you offer in terms of a career. Kristen, would love your perspectives as organizations, organizations who weren't challenged before are all of a sudden being challenged. Those who may have had challenging talent markets before, like Brandon's example in technology or in healthcare, are exceptionally challenged. But across the board, we're exploring new and different ways of doing things. Where would you suggest organizations start when it comes to doubling down to compete?
It's a great question. And I think you got to double down where you've got challenge. You're not going to double down everywhere. You're going to pick your battles. And, I think we're experiencing a kind of a classic supply and demand mismatch. We had lots of folks leave the talent market for a number of reasons. They all haven't come back for that same number of reasons. In terms of Alcon, where we have some challenges, and I've been doing this for a long time, and this is the first time in my career that we've had the challenge primarily in the manufacturing realm. So those frontline workers, I'm sure Stephanie's experiencing the same thing. It's like nothing I've ever seen before, and the data shows it. So if you look at wage growth, we've seen the fastest wage growth in 2021 than we've seen in the last 20 years. So wage growth in 21 so far is about 4.3%, when you would typically see 2 to 3% max wage growth. So you've got, organizations like Amazon coming in and offering big salaries and sign-on bonuses for the same work. So it is driving up wages overall, because you can't just look at wage increases for your new hires. So it's having some significant impacts. I think on the knowledge worker side, once again, no surprise after Me Too and the murder of George Floyd and the big social justice movement, lots of organizations are looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and figuring out how do we show up in this space. And so the competition for diverse talent is once again really tough. Investors, shareholders are looking at organizations and wanting to know where they stand. So I think it all boils down, whether it's manufacturing, knowledge workers, engineering, what is your employment value proposition? Is this an opportunity to refresh and really understand what is both credible and attractive about your organization? And where do you have opportunity to make adjustments? So, flexible, working conditions, hybrid arrangements are becoming more the norm than the exception. And being able to articulate that along with the other elements of your value proposition through the recruiting process is what's landing the candidates.
Yeah, Kristen, I think it's fascinating because I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing that we are. I mean, you can't do manufacturing from your home, right? Can't care for children. Our teachers have to be in our centers, right? And so that just adds a layer of complexity to this talent shortage, I think, right? Who's willing to be in person? Who's willing to come out of their house? And it's fascinating to me. And that's why some of the things that we did were really double down on this health and safety piece, right? So talking about what we're doing to make them safe in the workplace. And quite frankly, we know that that's not a consideration for everybody, but it is a consideration for a lot of people. And so I think when you think about the jobs that we are hiring for, that can create even more difficulty, right?
Yeah, flexibility is different depending on the role. So, flexibility for a knowledge worker is one thing. For a frontline or manufacturing or in your care and child care situations would be different. But we're doing some research on this, and I think it's interesting. Flex in, kind of a you have to be there in person type of job can be, I want flex about when I'm there. So instead of being, 8 to 5, maybe what works for my life is 10 to 7. May actually work for some, working parents as well. But flexibility isn't a one size fits all.
For sure. Absolutely agree.
That's a great point here, that the decision drivers that are driving decisions about whether to join and whether to stay at an organization are in flux. In this very moment, I feel like those factors are in flux and a little bit nebulous. And then how do you invest on something that's nebulous? And I want to go back to one of the points that Brandon made here around the use of technology. Many organizations are, looking to technology. There are technologies out there that claim to do a whole lot of things using AI, using, data scraping, all of those good things. And I think there are some things that there is an absolute utility for when it comes to technology. And there are some things that I think are probably just fad. Brandon, you want to kick us off talking a little bit about, where is the utility when it comes to using technology? Where should we think about investing, and what would you take or leave?
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question. I will start by saying, if you look at candidate experience, it really models the retail experience. And the reason why I say that is because candidates essentially want a few things: a fast, an easy, and a personalized experience. And when I think about where to invest in technology, the number one place I would go is specifically into the candidate experience. If we think of, for example, CRMs, so long are the days with traditional applicant tracking systems where you're doing this transaction type of thing with a candidate, and it's very administrative. Candidates really want to kind of see what you're all about and make it easy for them to identify jobs. And that's where the CRM essentially comes in, where they come into this really nice branded experience. The system, depending on the type of tech that you have within the CRM, it'll automatically tell you where you should be applying to based off of your browsing history. It'll identify where you should apply based off of your location. So all of that is bucketed to this easy experience where I don't really have to do a lot of thinking because it's all right in front of me. So I think that's the first place. But then once I get to the point where I say, yes, I want to apply for a job at Bright Horizons, as an example, the very next step is to get them through the process really fast. And that is where you find your robotic process automation. I have seen it where, especially for jobs where they're low touch, but very high volume, you can do an end-to-end experience without a recruiter touching them. You have a candidate, they apply at 12 a.m. and then they go through the quick application. You can then send them a short form screening through what's called a digital interviewing technology, which you see a lot in the high volume space. You would have self-scheduling available to them. So they go essentially over probably a 10 to 15 minute span from a job seeker to a scheduled applicant to a job. So I see a lot of organizations moving in that direction when it goes to that type of high volume role, because again, you get them through this great experience that's very fast, and they're not waiting for somebody to call them the next day. So I do believe that we'll continue to see more of that. I think in particular, AI, I've heard a lot about AI sourcing. And I want to go into that a little bit, because when I think about AI sourcing in general, one of the places where I see it being most effective is predicting how this person will fit into your organization. So I'll see three particular areas when you're sourcing talent. Number one is, how good of a fit are they based off of their job profile? So the system will automatically, look for that for you. What's their likelihood to leave based off of how many times they've jumped throughout their career? There's certain mining that the system will do. And then finally, what's their likelihood to be successful long term in their role? So I think a part of that can be a little challenging depending on what amount of data is already available in the system. But talking to a lot of leaders, that is one place they heavily invest in when it comes to AI sourcing, because we have all these hiring managers screaming at us saying, I want to find the right talent faster. And I know there's this golden pot somewhere that there's this untapped talent that we haven't touched. So again, you see this AI sourcing come up a lot, but I want to go to a point as well that's come up a lot, which is DE&I. And I've actually seen within the last year to year and a half that now you have a lot of AI sourcing technologies that are saying, hey, we can also find the right diversity talent for you as well. Now, oftentimes when I go into sales pitches with those organizations, I find that it's not as great as they're telling you it is, because there's still like a tremendous amount of data that they're asking you for in order to find that right diverse talent. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a fad by any means, but I think that's one area to be really careful of, is when you're hearing a lot of technology vendors saying, we have the secret sauce to really finding your diverse talent. And then the final place that I would go when it comes to AI sourcing is around predictive analytics. So I've talked about that very briefly when I talked about job fit and all this other stuff, but I do want to go specifically into the process. I have seen where screening technologies have now said, like, based off of how they answer these questions in our screening, this is how they'll likely do with the hiring manager. This is how they'll likely do for the role. So that's something that a couple of the top digital interview providers in the market have started to demo for different organizations. But then, of course, you have your more traditional predictive analytics around, particularly in the workforce analytics space of how much are we going to lose talent and when do we need to hire them. And I think that's another area that we're still looking to develop because I've sat with many data scientists that have said, like, hey, yes, I have the right formula, but I think it's the right formula for their situation. Where when you kind of look broadly, there's still a lot more work that I think will go along with it. So to answer your question one more time, technology, it is here to stay because just like for our retail experience, I want to see a retargeted ad on my Instagram page that I'm going to click and I'm going to say, yes, I want this watch and I'm going to do a one click where I want it now. And candidates essentially want the same thing. Tell me what I should apply to, make it easy for me, and then get me through your process as fast as possible.
I have to laugh a little here, Brandon, because I feel like we've just about all had that experience where we thought about something that we might want to buy and it all of a sudden shows up on our phone. You didn't even look for it and you're like,
right?
How did that happen? But you're right, we're accustomed to that now and it's changed how we consume information, how we shop and how we shop for jobs. But I think one of the important things, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Kristen, that Brandon mentioned is it's a machine, a very smart machine, but it doesn't do the thinking for you. The strategy piece, who are you looking for? Where do you look for them? What types of personas might do, particularly well in our organization? What are your thoughts on kind of the balance between the human experience, the strategy, and the machine or process to support it?
Yeah, I mean, AI, machine learning, it's going to be part of talent acquisition today and moving forward. I would be very cautious on machine learning and AI in the US for hiring because I think from an assessment perspective, we're not quite there yet. And I think organizations can get themselves in trouble a bit. But I will say that at the end of the day, the recruiting process, we're always going to look at technology to find the best ways, to Brandon's point, to be faster and more efficient. But at the end of the day, this is a process that is about people and people making decisions. And losing the human touch in this process is a way to lose candidates, to be, frank about it. And I was thinking back when I heard this question, I mean, when applicant tracking systems were first hitting the market, like 20 years ago. And I remember assessing a whole bunch of vendors to determine what one we were going to put in, and what they told me about what recruiting was going to look like in the future. I was buying it, hook, line, and sinker. And I promise it doesn't look anything like what they told me. So, I mean, I remember hearing, what? Resumes are a thing of the past. They're not even going to exist because we're all going to use these profiles. It's going to be so much faster. It's going to be way more efficient. And I haven't found a hiring manager yet that doesn't want to see the resume of a candidate. So, talking about tech stacks and AI and machine learning, it sounds super sexy. But I think you have to look at what is the adoption of the technology? How does it actually serve the needs of the business and your main stakeholders? And those stakeholders are your business leaders and your candidates. And I think we're all gonna, in another 10, 20 years go, we've moved the needle and we've adopted certain pieces, so my, resume example, yeah, we still look at resumes, but we don't look at them in hard copy anymore. We look at them electronically. But there are gonna be things that we adopt that make sense. And there are things that we're going to find that, oh, that was funny. We considered that. And it's just the way that all this whole space works. We're going to see iterative change where it makes sense and where it adds value.
Can I jump in really quick? I think Kristen hit it on the head. You have to look at what is right, essentially, for your organization. I have so many peers that they get so caught up in this flash. We all go to HR Tech. We get the cool socks. So we're brought in to these great demos where they tell us they're going to do everything for us, but everything that they say they're going to do for you may not be great for your organization. So I think it's really important, before you invest in any technology, you need to understand the why. Why are we doing this? What is our strategy for the next, year, 2 years, 3 years down the line? Because then that'll really inform where you should be putting your investment versus going after the what, which is, let me just touch this cool tool that I hear will get people through the process faster, and it may be terrible for your organization. So I had to jump in because, Kristen, that was such a great point to bring up.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would say, we just invested in some technology, right, at Bright Horizons, but and did so willingly, right? We needed to do it, and we had very specific reasons why we were doing it, but evaluating that technology was a super interesting part of this process. And I think it's always fascinating to me how quickly technology is evolving in the TA space versus the rest of HR. And it feels like there's something new every quarter, right? And a lot of people slap that label of AI on it. And I think as leaders in talent acquisition, well, AI sounded fantastic, right? When we were talking about it 3 years ago, that's fantastic. But really, did AI work the way it was designed to work or what we thought it would do? We're not there yet, right? And so for me, I feel like, yes, it's here to stay, but again, select the right technology, but also be smart about what you need, right? So for us, yes, we want that, to Brandon's point earlier, we want that candidate experience to be as quick as possible. So we're doing exactly the same thing, right? The recommendations based on where you live and your resume and how you interact on the website and all that kind of stuff. And we're retargeting folks. We're doing those things. But I think the other piece that we're really focused on is how can the technology make sure that the recruiter is providing a better, how can it aid the recruiter, right? Versus take away from, like before it was, how much can I get off the recruiter's plate with this technology, which is still somewhat that, I would guess that's probably still somewhat what we're looking at, right? But I think in addition to that, it's also how do I make the recruiter better at their job? How do I help them? And so that's kind of how we look at it. It should complement the human experience versus taking over the human experience.
So you both hit on one thing that I think is really interesting and important. And Kristen, you use this example of a talent supply chain, right? And that's what we're talking about, is getting talent in. And one of the things that we've seen with our clients time and time again, or individuals who've tried to improve the recruitment process, is we focus so much on the core recruiting process, getting it as fast as we can, getting the newest, best, most sexy tools to predict everything we can in terms of fit all the way through. But one of the things that is really, really challenging for most organizations really is that front end. So even before the talent, who you're looking for and where you go to find them, what talent does the organization need, right? So think of workforce planning. We have a tendency to look kind of right in front of our feet and be very reactive to open roles, to skills that we know that we're going to need in the next 6 to 12 months. But to Brandon's point, as you think longer term, 18 months, 3 years about where the business is going, that can change who you're looking for and how you think about bringing in certain types of talent to either grow those skills or bring them in kind of net new. So that's one of the areas that, while technology won't necessarily fix that one for us, is something that I'm seeing as becoming increasingly important so you can get ahead of that curve. Any reactions to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's part of a broader talent strategy. So you look at from a workforce planning, from a talent acquisition perspective, it tends to be on the shorter term side. What do I need? And I hate the words workforce planning. I like to be directionally correct. Give me an understanding of what the needs are going to be so I can, staff my organization to meet the demands of the business over the next year. The other side of that, and I think that the bigger picture of that, is how does that fit into an overall talent strategy? What are the critical capabilities that the business is going to need over the next 3 to 5 years to meet their business objectives? That informs a much different type of longer term strategy in terms of what's the proactive pipeline I need to build? What does my internal talent look like in terms of succession planning and how I'm going to be able to meet those needs? And then marrying that with what am I doing from an external perspective to start building that, kind of talent pool that I can fish from when the demand comes up? So it's, they're certainly intertwined, but I think they're two kind of, cousins of the same bigger picture talent strategy.
All right. So I'd love to wrap up with one final question here. Each of you have been, kind of through the ringer in implementing some of these new strategies through improving your own talent acquisition organizations and your current organizations, previous organizations, and the like. They say hindsight's 20/20. If you were looking back on your former self or a leader who's about to go through this same journey, what one piece of advice or lesson learned would you share with that leader? Kristen, you want to get us started?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, one of my favorite quotes in the world is, if you can't be a good example, at least be a horrible warning. So I will be a horrible warning for people. I mean, you get to where you are based on mistakes you make and learn from along the way. And probably the one I would say has been most, the horrible warning experience that's been most beneficial to me is really understand what you're solving for. You can, I think we've talked about it in this discussion, you can get excited about stuff within your function. Like, oh, this would be so cool. Oh, I want to do this because it would be amazing. But actually really dig deep, and before you launch into doing any piece of work, understand what the needs of the business are. Make sure you're putting in solutions that are actually solving for that. The example I'll give, the first applicant tracking system I implemented, I was sitting with the vendor and they're like, you can do this and you can do this and you can do this. And I was like, yes, 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 I want all of it. And I built something that I think people would have chased me down and stabbed me if they could, because it was so complex. It was so cumbersome, but I could get so many reports out of it, which sounded amazing. And so what I've learned is, no, I really needed to know that, people want something super easy, super streamlined. And the reporting, while as sexy as I thought that sounded, I should limit it to what do I need to know most, and then build from there. So that would be my my takeaway.
Yeah, I that's fantastic, Kristen. I could just say ditto. But what I would say is one of the things that I have, and again, not well, I guess it is hindsight, but one of the things it feels like this is all I ever do in my career. Every job I have, it's like building a new team or putting a new technology in or doing something, right? As I've gone from company to company. But what I would say, the best lesson that I've ever learned is get the business involved in the decision-making process, right? Get their buy-in from the very beginning. Understand what their perception is reality, right? So we want to understand their perception of the process, the tools, the team, and dig into that to understand what are the problems, right? Like what are causing the issues before you invest, right? Because if you go in, to your point, Kristen, you go and invest in something that's not going to meet their needs, that's overly complicated, that makes them cringe every time they have to log into the system and they just don't even want to hire anybody anymore, then you've got a problem. So I would say getting them engaged in the process from the get-go is the most important thing.
That's such a fantastic point from both of you. The advice I would give, I'm going to take the operational side of it, being very thoughtful when it comes to implementation timeline, as well as the change management. And both of you started going to the change management as well, which I think is important. I'll start with implementation timeline. I find, especially when you're doing a big transformation, you want to plug in multiple technologies. I would be really thoughtful about putting them all in at once. To the point that we've all talked about of making sure that what you're plugging in works for the business. Sometimes when you're plugging something in, even if it's what they're asking for, at the wrong time, it could be very detrimental to adoption. So that's a key thing that you definitely want to think through. And part of that is also assessing what else is going on in an organization, because it could be the perfect timeline for you, but there could be so many other things going on in the organization where it's not the right time to introduce such a new change to them, which leads me to my second point around change management. I love the piece around inviting your stakeholders into the design. That's a core part of a successful change management strategy, but it also goes to two more things. Number one is training, and not only training for your recruiters, I find training for your hiring managers on how to adjust to the new technology that you're plugging in that's going to better serve them. But then the second thing that I would say is just ensuring that they understand the behavioral changes that they'll have to make. Because I think when you plug in new technologies and you're implementing these new processes, that also comes with a change in behavior. So everyone has to be aware of that, which should be baked into your overall change management strategy. So those are the two things I would tell myself all the way back when before doing anything.
Excellent. All great insights. Hope folks at home are taking notes so that they can, go ahead and learn from your, not mistakes, your epiphanies along the way. Appreciate you guys for joining us here today. This has been an awesome discussion. Really appreciate all of the insights, experiences that you've shared. If folks at home want to continue the conversation about talent acquisition, employment branding, or employee experience, join us at axiomcp.com. Take care for now.